Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 16th day of December 2022. I wanted to talk to you about what I would call just many things have been on my mind. How this is part of going to be about Tavistock Institute, but it's also going to be about how they manipulate you and actually are seeking to make you like them. And what I mean by that is that they want you to become mentally sick like they are. They want to destroy the love within you. They want to keep you in fear, which is a low perspective of life. And they want to just gradually grind you down. And so what's happening simply is all the propaganda is taking place today is aimed at all different areas in your world, in your whole. It's like an omni type of view. I don't mean a view, but an omni perspective. So what they do is they're seeking to crush your will to live. Part of that has to do with the food issue. Part of it has to do with you becoming discouraged and depressed. Part of it is due to you give up. You don't fight. And when I mean fight, meaning standing for truth, because both sides are controlled. It's just like Republican and Democrat. It's just like Biden and Russia's leader. Just forgot his name. But anyway, the idea is to make you gravitate to one of these sides, right and left, Republican and Democrat. When reality is, I've shared this before, is just like there's just two wings of a bird, you see. And so this is how they keep you going from here to there, and you're not on stable ground. You're not on solid ground. You don't see the man behind the curtain, so to speak. You see, they've been doing this for a long time, folks. I mean, they've become very sophisticated nowadays in many ways in what they do. But what they're seeking is to destroy mankind. That's their goal. They're seeking to deal with the Georgia Guidestones, which is no longer there. They want to eliminate so many people on this planet. And I think what they're seeking is to gradually, little by little, by using their psychological warfare that's taking place right before our eyes. The whole COVID-19 thing is a psyop. It's not based upon reality. It's based upon keeping you in a, obeying the authorities. They are the ones who know best for us, you see. And so what's happening, they're steering you. They're steering you as cattle and leading you in the direction that you don't want to go. Very sophisticated. I doubt many people, the only people I know of that does a good job on this is Mr. Coleman, John Coleman, who wrote a book on Tavistock Institute. There is another guy, another author, who has also written a book, also a more modern version. I think it was put out in 2010 or so. But there's a lot going on here, a lot. And you need to be prepared in certain areas you're going to be on your own. And you're going to be by yourself in a lot of ways, different ways. And this is a multi-pronged type of warfare that's being used against you. Part of it's also to do with what we call, as a child or as a student in school, uh, the one who is being pushed to be like everybody else and not standing in your truth, you will be persuaded and you'll be in quicksand. And that's the whole idea, is to manipulate you, fool you, get you into certain beliefs that are not true, and lead you in the wrong direction. And so their whole hope is eventually, part of it has to do with the United Nations. The United Nations is not a mutual deal, guys. It isn't. They use it as they're saying they're peacekeeping troops and all this, sort of speaking like they're promoting this, but they use it in a way that people go along with it. You see, similar to NATO. Same thing. The whole idea with Ukraine situation. Why are we there? I mean, why are we there? You see, this is part of Zelensky's idea simply was that he, in what we call foreign policy, was to basically put a ring around Russia. You see, and to put pressure upon Russia. Do I believe that Russia is innocent? No, I don't. No, I don't. I believe that Putin and Biden are part of it. They work together, and one looks like the good guy and the other looks like the bad guy. It's similar to what I call the bad cop, good cop type of thing. But it's not true. It's not true. There's no good guy in this whole thing. So I'm going to read some things here from a particular guy I got off the internet. I thought it was pretty well done. So it's just simply called MK Ultra, Tavistock, Use Social Engineering at the Tavistock Institute. And we'll just go into this. There's a couple of guys. Also, there's another writer who I think works in this area, although he is dealing with what I would call more of the religious perspective, but he also deals with the psychological. And it's Mr. Hoffman, Hoffman, who is out in the state of Idaho. I think he's located in Moscow, Idaho, I think. But I've had him before on here, secret societies and propaganda, I think it is, or psychological warfare. If you can get that book, it tells you what's really kind of going on, even though the book is now dated in some ways, but it's still up to date, so to speak. So here we go. Psychiatric engineering, start over here. Psychiatric eugenics arose out of the quarters of elite few who, like Hitler, wanted to improve society. This is the primary goal of psychiatric eugenics, to ensure that the genes of the intellectual superior and the elite is passed on. In 1958, the British Eugenics Society reviewed the possibilities of artificial insemination, genetically, medically, legally, and socially. Psychiatric eugenics gave birth to the psychological arm of genetic eugenics: gene testing, cloning, prenatal genetic determination, artificial insemination, birth control, and euthanasia. Again, more to do with control of just eliminating the whole idea of a man and a woman, representing the public playing field. The past may seem irrelevant, but it has been paving a way to the future, which much invested time, money, and organization by a certain few. Psychiatric eugenics became more concrete when the Rockefeller Foundation and the Canadian military joined forces in psychiatric research in 1943. In 1944, Norman, Norman Montagu, spell that for you, Montagu, resigned from the Bank of England and began the National Association for Mental Health. Now, this is goes in context of when I was at the library recently, probably 6 months ago, maybe a little less than that. I had a conversation with someone who is completely dogmatically that we need to be spending more money on mental health has no idea what she's proposing or pushing. This is how they got people so well trained in believing that all we need to do is handle this whole situation with mental health, and we'll solve it. And this is where this lady was saying to me, "Well, we just need more money for this." But in reality, simply, it's just more research in how to control us. So his wife, Priscilla Ranelius, a pro-eugenicist and vice chairman, was Norman's British group expanded to take control of the world psychiatric profession. In 1948, NAMH gathered the world psychiatric and psychological leaders from the International Congress on Mental Health at the UK Ministry of Health and formed the World Federation for Mental Health. Nina Reiner, technical coordinator to the U.S. delegation, wrote in Mental Health in the United States, a 50-year history. The World Federation for Mental Health had been created upon the recommendation of the United Nations, the WHO, World Health Organization, and UNESCO, because they needed a non-government, non-checked by local law or constitution. So this is how they ran over this, okay? This is how they use it in a way with the United Nations, because he bypassed the laws here. The Congress was run by the host, NAMH, whose patron was the Duchess of Kent, widow of Grand Master of Masons, 1939-42. By the 1950s, the British Psychological Warfare Unit coordinated a behavior control group at Tavistock. Now remember, this Tavistock is not a government-run program. It's been completely given money by private or those who actually want to see it succeed. So it is not a government-funded agency, not an agency, but a group. And so what happens simply is, again, there's no body controlling these people. You see, there are no hands, no government hands on part of this. They're not getting government money. Which involved, let's go back to Tavistock, involved in the Scottish Rite, the CIA, U.S. and Canadian and UN agencies. The Tavistock Institute, 54 years later, the Tavistock Institute is still active today. It hasn't gone away, folks. It's still here. It has never been funded, like I've said, by the government. The Institute is still involved in all the areas of concern to the elite: anthropology, economics, organization behavior, political science, psychoanalysis, psychology, and sociology, with a network that includes the University of Sussex, where Tavistock Institute of Human Rights is located. Also, we have the Stanford Research Institute, MIT, the Hudson Institute, the Heritage Foundation, US, the Center of Strategic International Studies, Georgetown, which trains State Department personnel, the U.S. Air Force Intelligence, and the RAND Corporation. Tavistock's social science includes certain familiar names. In fact, I didn't have any idea of this. So these are some of the people who have been involved with this. Leon Trotsky, Lord Northcliffe, Adolf Hitler. Do you understand what this is all about? H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, Walter Rockenthal, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Lord Bertrand Russell, who was also involved in the Olympians, Queen Victoria, cousin of Wilhelm II, King George V, and even Woodrow Wilson. Before the Institute was established in London in 1947 at Wellington House, it had been given a building by the 11th Duke, the Duke of Bedford, Marquis of Tavistock, for which it got its name, to investigate the breaking point of men under stress as observed by shell-shocked British soldiers from World War I under the direction of Sir John Rawlings Rees. Very key individual. He's the one who basically put this all together, the organization, and allowed the organizations to work. But there were many organs, what I call groups, that are involved in this. It's not just this one little group here. You see, they're all coming from different areas. In charge of British Army Bureau of Psychological Warfare. Get my mouth here. So another key individual you can look into is Kurt Lewin, Lewin, became director at Tavistock in 1932. Now, I've done some of the information on this. Also, it's important for you to understand the Frankfurt Institute was a beginning of some of this stuff, but a lot of this is also what we call the long road. What part of it was to do with Antonio Gramsci. But Gramsci only represented a certain part of this, and eventually he passed away at a very young age. But some of these things that got his ideas were also used in these groups, also, especially at Frankfurt School. Okay, and then the Frankfurt School left Germany because of Hitler coming to power, and then went to England. But then what happened was England, such and such, they got all these guys here that are involved and invited them in. Dr. John Coleman, who worked with Tavistock, he did work with them. That's the reason why he knew about them. Exposed their workings, stated boldly, without Tavistock, there would have never been World War I, World War II, no Bolshevik Revolution, no Korea, no Vietnam, no Serbia, no Iraqi wars, and nothing to do with Afghanistan and Iran. Not Iran, but Iraq. Now think about that. See, they work people up in a frenzy. They also have key people who work in governments all around the world. And they advise their presidents or prime ministers or chancellors, whoever they are, and to do certain things. It's interesting, isn't it? The whole idea, when we remember the Arab Spring, I remember the media was putting all this propaganda out, saying simply is that this is going to be a wonderful thing, it's going to be great for the people here. In reality, it simply was not. What happened with these Middle Eastern countries at that time, where they had what I call someone who was more middle of the road in power, not someone who's hard left or hard right. You see. And so they used that in order to, again, the media was part of this also. So let's continue on. Coleman's reason for this understanding lies at the roots of Tavistock's origins. As a PSYOP research unit of British intelligence, the sole purpose was to create propaganda and disseminate in the period that led up to World War I. Okay. You see, why would America, you got to ask a basic question here, why would America get involved in Europe's situation? Why would they get involved? And it all comes in and said, well, they sunk the Lusitania for 200 or 300 or 400, I don't know how many people it was, less than 2,000 people, so to speak. You're going to go to war? You see? But the key is you have to follow this. One thing leads to another, because in the Wilson administration here, if they have not gotten the Wilson deal with the Aldrich plan or the plan of the Republicans to get passed in Congress for the bankers to artificially create money out of nothing. Before that, the Treasury Department took that responsibility to do that, okay? And so what happened was simply is they could bypass that. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It's not a reserve, and it's not a system. It's a group of a few people who use that, create money, and what they do is they can have plenty of money to create wars. You see? Because they're just printing them, paper. Yes, there's some gold or silver behind this. Yes, that's definitely. But what they would do simply is they would use that in order to help all the European countries at that point who had basically been spending all their money in the military, and they were basically out of money. And so the United States, in entering the war with them giving money, lend, lease, all these things taking place, and they just kept creating money and paying such and such. You see? So they could have never done these things had it not been for the creation of the Fed. And Paul Warburg is the one who did this. And they met secretly at Jekyll Island. No one knew who they were or whatever. But let's continue here. So, continue section of mass brainwashing. Our staff work creatively with people involved in innovatively activities, working across boundaries or in difficult situations. We combine research analytical skills with practical help in devising solutions and in following through to implementation, and are particularly known for our capacity to work with issues that are otherwise hidden and sometimes unconsciously. So what they're doing simply is, this is a master plan, and that there are people who are willing to do these things because they're getting paid money. And most have no idea what Joe over here is doing, and Robert's doing, and Mike over here. Whoever these guys, individual, they're all working in congruency of like a spider web, so to speak, and spinning the web to catch the enemy. One of the direct results of the work of Tavistock Institute is a mass brainwashing techniques, which were first part to be tested in Korea. Yes. Do you not remember that the soldiers, actually, American soldiers, were taken to the camps after they were defeated in certain areas in Korea, and were taken to them, and they didn't want to go back home. The brainwashing was so sufficient in working what they were doing that they blamed their own country for doing what was wrong. They did not want to go back home. Now, this is after the Second World War. This is in the 1950s. And they had already developed a plan in a way that the Koreans, which were probably Chinese, and teaching them how to, quote unquote, brainwash soldiers and to put pressure on them to eventually to quit or give up in a controlled environment. Again, this is a form of a test. This is what's taking place also. So let's continue on. One Tavistock offshoot was the MK Ultra project in the 1970s, established in the 1950s and funded by the CIA, and the LSD experiment was facilitated in Canada by Dr. D. Cameron, C-A-M-E-R-O-N, president of the Canadian Psychological Association and director of the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal. The experiment included brainwashing by LSD, being drugged into weeks of sleep, hypnosis, electroshock treatment, led on, and then eventually this caused habit to these particular people. Revelation of the experiment resulted in cinema coverage of the U.S. government payout of millions of dollars because of the families of the victims. But that was pushed under the rug, folks. All these things have been pushed under the rug. If you control the media in a country or anywhere, you report what they want you to report. It's not a free press. It's, they're reporting what they want themselves and then keep everything else covered up. They don't want to share the real truth, unless they want you to be divided, and there's still not truth there, so they divide you in different ways, which is what's happened in this country here. There was no division in this country, between Republicans and Democrats like I've ever seen here in the last 15 years, 20 years. It's been used to divide people, to no longer see neighbor as neighbor, but to actually see them as an enemy. And that's working to their plan. That's what they want. If you're divided, you cannot stand as a country. So LSD was created by the Swiss drug company called Sandoz, S-A-N-D-O-Z, but was owned by S.G. Warburg Company of London. The Warburgs were active as advisors to President Roosevelt. I.A. Warburg, who was son of Paul Warburg. Now, Paul Warburg passed away, I think, in the late 30s. He was actually helping the Roosevelt administration. He was also key in the Wilson administration. But he also is the one who wrote the whole deal with the Federal Reserve. Okay. He was a nephew of Max Warburg, who financed Hitler to carry out the international elite's experiment on Jews in Germany. The public release of LSD gave rise to illegitimate births, lawlessness, drug addiction, BD, and mental illness along with the student revolutions in the 1960s, financed by the tune of $525 million by the CIA. The Tavistock agenda had been searching into youth culture and reaching into youth culture since the 1960s. First through LSD and recently through hip-hop, which was initially a music that rose out of social awareness. This hip-hop that many people love to hate is the hip-hop manipulated by the Tavistock group. Now, I want to explain something. Music is all the genre, I remember in the 1980s and 70s, whatever, when I graduated from high school and went to college, the music had an effect upon me, okay? But I didn't have any taste for the 60s. Some of it I didn't care for, such and such, because it was tailored as though it was something of our generation, but it was all done to manipulate the youth, you see. And this is what's happened. Now, the interesting thing is simply is the hip-hop stuff has been going on for over 25 years. You see. It's gone far more than what it normally is, because it's a music that's degrading not only themselves, but degrading females. So, the other thing I have to ask yourself simply is go back to Roosevelt. Why did Roosevelt, or why did the United States recognize the Soviet Union? If we were supposedly the enemy, this is in World War II, this is such and such, why was the U.S., Britain, France, such and such, why we had nothing in common? They're a communist country. We're supposedly a republic, although that changed gradually during the Wilson administration. So we became a democracy. And democracy is not the same thing, folks. That's how you choose, how you people think you're voting for things. And they used all these things like women's vote, all these things. I'm not putting against women. That's not the point. The point simply is they used these as tools. And eventually what they did was also use popular vote, because the U.S. Senate spots, you chose, the state did, not the people, state did. And what happened was simply is they took the state rights away, which was a threat to them, and went to the popular people, the votes. So they control both sides. It's to their advantage, okay? There's no doubt that their strict adherence to the laws of Quran, this they're talking about the Muslims now, and their Islamic faith is what folded Tavistock plans for the Middle East, at least temporarily. Therefore, a concerted drive was mounted, I should say, to wage war on the Muslim world. And that's what we're seeing the last 25 years. Notice that the United States has been in these countries. And notice that Saudi Arabia has attacked Yemen. Why would Saudi Arabia need to do that? Why do we go to protect a country that was never in existence before First World War? Actually, it probably was created how they divided the whole part of the Middle East, a country called Kuwait. All these countries were created after that, like the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, you name them. Okay, there's 6 or 7 of them on the coast of the Persian Gulf. Think about it. This is done for a purpose here. By interjecting 9/11 into the global scenario, enough antagonism was created to bring about the internal directional condition. This is what they're doing. They're leading people in a mass deal. So leaving Muslims to question their whole identity and way of life, though the use of humiliating accusations that led to self-denial and a shift towards the Western view. So what they're doing is they're planting seeds in a way to destroy nation states. That's what they're doing. Gradually they're doing this because they want their world government. And you can't have a nation state involved with that, you see. That's how this whole thing. It's a slow deal here. It's a piecemeal war. Also, if you think about a battle on a field, if you send in certain things in a piecemeal deal, you wouldn't win certain battles in Civil War. You wouldn't win sometimes battles even in World War One, because most of those were based upon, some of it was to do with trench warfare. You see, all right, you had to send all your might in somewhat to threaten the enemy and to overwhelm them. But if you did it the piecemeal, which is what they're doing now, in a way, now they're also, quote unquote, that's been done with them, but it's also been going on with us. It's also to do with the family. It's also to do to destroy the marriage, family, to break down the family so that there is no cohesion for the country to hold on to. It is the foundation of all Western society and civilization. It's the family, husband and wife, loving their kids, teaching them certain things, their values, such and such, their morals, all that type of thing. And that's all being destroyed. In fact, it's been going on for a long time. So let's continue. Tavistock proved over and over again that when a large group is successfully profiled, it can be subjected to interdirectional conditioning in just about every aspect of social and political life. A concept devised by John Rawlings Rees in 1954, the author of Tavistock Mass Mind Control Program, interdirectional conditioning is explained as follows. Their job is to apply the advanced techniques of psychological warfare as we know them to whole population groups that will grow ever larger so that whole populations may be more easily controlled. In a world driven completely mad, groups of Tavistock psychologists linked to each other, capable of influencing the political and government field, must be arbiters of the power cabal. He mentions here also the facilitators of interdirectional condition in American society include these people. So these are major people, okay, that are politically involved. George Shultz, who used to be part of the Department of State. Alexander Haig. You remember Alexander Haig? He was a general. He was very much close to actually taking over the government almost at one point in that part too, under Reagan, when he was shot. Okay. Larry King was involved. Admiral Berkeley is probably from the UK. Billy Graham. That's right, Billy Graham. William Buckley. Henry Kissinger. George Bush. Bill and Hillary Clinton. Rush Limbaugh. Bill O'Reilly. All these are used in certain ways, folks, because they're directing you to certain things. They're directing you, guiding you into where they want you to be. They don't talk about the real issues, folks. They actually do what I call they so cleverly plant these things in people's minds. It's in all areas. We no longer have control of our own thinking anymore. You see, because all of it's coming from outside and being spoon-fed to us. Hello, Miss SOJ. Good to see you. Thank you for your comment. So we go on to UK and U.S. relations here. The main focus of Tavistock attention has been the U.S. since 1946. The Tavistock, and reason why that is, British became no longer an economic power as it once was. It gradually ground itself down in some ways, so they chose to use the United States. This is part of the Bretton Woods agreement that took place, I think it's in Vermont. It took place right after the war, so that they actually would make the United States dollar being the financial instrument to everything is traded in. It was beneficial for the United States in some ways. You see, very beneficial. But that day is just about to end here too, also financially, economically. So let's continue on. Methodology was delivered by Rees and British intelligence and the British Army Psychological Warfare, which in turn has had full control over U.S. policies. Because they've got their Secretary of State positions, people in positions, and they are given reign in the economics and political realm. Like, for example, does it make any sense that you do a embargo on Russia now? And all it does is it backfires and actually causes pain for people in your own countries, Europe and the U.S. It actually has no effect upon the enemy, so to speak. It causes harm to the other people. The people in the country of U.S. and Europe suffer. No, just think about the natural gas situation and what's happening. Think about also, I heard something recently that to do with the coal. When the United States is destroyed almost all their coal power plants now, you see. We were basically had all these ways of actually providing things. And that's another thing. There is no such thing as, pollution that's actually causing harm to the planet. It has nothing to do with that. But that's how they conceive all this stuff. That's why they're building these electric cars, all this stuff. Oh, we got to get away from gas. This is bad for us. But yet, let me explain to you, all these corporations create all these things that actually are what I would call, that does bad things. You see, it does damage. Okay? Think about that. So let's continue on. So now here's the key with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the first president to have what he called managing. In other words, his office of presidency was being under former President Wilson was these men such as Colonel Mandel House. But there were other people who were involved in that. So since this period, before this type of thing, there were only a few key people, unless at that time, after Wilson, it becomes established simply as they're what we call people are politically sciences that know what they're talking about and are directing the president. That is not helping the president, but actually leading this country to its devastating end, you see. Because you have to understand these people who are involved in this are not working to help the U.S., they're working to bring the country down. And part of this is actually simply, just think about the Cold War. All the money has been used to supposedly deal with the Soviet Union. What has it benefited us? Think about it. We spent billions and billions of dollars, if not trillions. And then going over to like Korea and Vietnam and basically be unsuccessful in winning that. Well, that's part of the deal. Simply, it was to destroy this country, the morale. It was to destroy the morale of the people. There was no sense. Yes. Well, there are a lot of people who control opposition. That's the real problem here. Almost all of it is controlled opposition. And you'll see the controlled opposition tend to have what I call a very nice video. Everything's well made, well produced, everything. And that's part of it. It's so glamorous that actually, these people who get up here and, Rush Limbaugh was one of these. He was a great speaker that is on the radio. But I'm talking about people who are on the Fox News network and others, such as this on the CSNBC. But they're actually meant to fight each other and also to get people divided. So let's go back in here. So this was possible because members of the core of Tavistock Institute were positionally in the U.S. banking, industry, trade, defense, State Department, the White House, U.S. Senate by that time. In 1938, former President Roosevelt made a secret agreement with Churchill, which is in effect ceded U.S. sovereignty to England by allowing special operations executive control U.S. policies. Those policies led to the formation of the OSS, which is now the CIA, which still works according to Tavistock guidelines. It's just like someone with a puppet just leading these people such and such. One of these joint operations was the mass civilian bombing raids that took place in NATO, bombing Libya. Can anybody tell me why did we attack Libya? Because they were a threat in some ways because they had oil. But why would the U.S. be involved in that? What's the threat? Libya did not attack anybody, period. In fact, they were very self-sufficient. So, in other words, we made these people like boogeymen, and our military got involved and said, let's just get involved. Both us and the British were involved in that. Think about it. Needless loss of life for people. The same things in Iraq. We actually set up, what's his name, in power, and was actually pushed by our own CIA to attack Kuwait. And he was used. Saddam Hussein. They do this. It's enormously, incredibly how they do this and cause harm for the rest of the people here, of their people. Innocent people. They didn't do anything. Did they attack the United States? No. So let's continue on here. But then, reminiscence of the recent NATO bombings, but then rewards were kept to assess the results with the aim to test the breaking point of an individual and to no longer be resilient to dictatorship by removing all social support mechanisms, including families. This is a war against all humanity, folks. This is what's going on. A branch of the International Institute for Applied Behavior Science, which formulates stress training based on immense training whereby the participants are forced to defend themselves against vicious accusations. Freudian psychology proved to be an effective tool in enabling a mental illness. Once achieved sexual encounters are encouraged, as was in the case of establishing the philosophy of humanism by the French and British elite in Turkey towards the downfall of the Ottoman Empire. This was during the First World War. Frequent sexual encounters increase the inability to connect and establish healthy relations, a practice that is employed by the U.S. Army and is provided by the soldiers. They actually provide Viagra for the U.S. soldiers. This is lunacy. It was Tavistock psychologist Dr. Peter Bourne, B-O-U-R-N-E, who selected Jimmy Carter for president because Carter had undergone brainwashing. Another experiment aimed at removing knowledge of one's own identity and racial heritage was organized by Ronald Lippert, F-L-I-P-P-E-R-T, of the former CIA organization, OSS, and the American Jewish Congress, and also director of child training at the Commission of Community Relations. Even before Jimmy Carter, there was former U.S. President Eisenhower, selected by the Olympians. Again, this is the elite part of Tavistock. Eisenhower was selected as commander of the Allied forces in Europe for World War II. Do you remember that? You would have to read the story about how he moved up, and he was not considered he wasn't considered a best general there, okay? And he moved up rapidly, and he became the supreme commander of all the Allied forces in Europe. Anyway, we'll keep on. From that point, Eisenhower was appointed to the White House until he outlived his usefulness, which led to his veiled statement on the military-industrial complex and bankers, which had unfolded a great truth. Unfortunately, people don't know this, that Eisenhower had, there's a couple books out there, that Eisenhower had death camps on the Western Front. And so when German soldiers who were trying to get away from the Russians, who were fearful of them, and went to the Western Front in a way, that's why the Eastern Front gradually crashed much quicker. Plus, they also want to give the Soviet Union parts of Berlin. This is all a plan. This isn't by happenstance. Everything happens because there's a purpose in it. It's a purpose, all of it. You just think about that, how that is. So this continues on. So what they did was simply is that what happened was simply when these German troops surrendered to Eisenhower group, all of the Western Front, they were put in barbed wire deal with no, they were basically put out like dogs and cows outside. Seriously. There's a Canadian soldier guy that wrote a book. I'll have to give you the book name, but they did it. They starved them. They starved them, folks. And we're not the good guys here, okay? Just get that out of your head. We're not the good guys. We're not even the U.S. government anymore. This is basically people have completely control of pulling the strings up and down, whatever they want to do. So that think about it as simply as that. Why would he do that? Why would they actually kill those people? And actually, the funny thing is, Hitler. You remember Hitler when the whole thing with the British troops were actually at Dunkirk? Now, this doesn't make any sense, but this does make sense because Hitler himself was mesmerized. He thought the British. He never attacked Britain by land. He never did. He allowed them to go back to their home, so to speak. The British troops from Dunkirk. They did not take advantage of the British situation. And his generals were like, what are you doing? He was believing by what they were telling him by other agents that the British are going to overthrow their own government. He believed that because he had agents in his own army who are telling him, in his own government, I should say, telling him, hey, this is what we need to do. They're going to fall in our hands, such and such. So he never attacked and killed them in Dunkirk. Made no sense at all. And then decided, okay, that's over with. In other words, he didn't think the British. That's why he chose his focus no longer on the Western Front, so to speak. Not to say he didn't have troops there, but what he was doing simply is, now I can look towards Russia, the Soviet Union. Now I can look to them. And his generals are like, wait a minute, we haven't defeated the enemy here in the Western Front. What are we doing over here in the Eastern Front? And they'll tell you simply is, the whole idea of Stalingrad was that Hitler was determined to, what I call, take that. He went after that particular area instead of going to the oil fields. Instead, he went after Stalingrad, which is not quite on the direct path to that area. So he's no longer looking for oil fields. He's wanting to attack Stalingrad because it has the name Stalin in it, so to speak. And eventually, the German troops had to surrender. They didn't have any way of actually surviving. They didn't have arms or either way of staying warm during the Soviet Union's cold weather. Former President Bill Clinton survived many scandals through the Tavistock inventions of national polls. That's another thing that they do. Very controlled, which led him still in the hearts and minds of the American people. This went a step further in the case of G.W. Bush because the war against Iraq was never declared constitutionally. Bush could not be removed from office constitutionally. To the case of Libya, there are Tavistock selected members of NATO, which is why NATO was able to get away with bombing Serbia for 72 years. You remember that whole ordeal in the latter part of the Clinton administration? NATO's not what we want either. It's another deal. But anyway, education and business now. U.S.-based Tavistock institutions and national training laboratories. It was founded as far back as 1947. Again, this is all after World War II. Let's see. This was also with they baited Germany to fight in not only one war, but a second one. And eventually to the point that they never wanted to get involved in war again or such and such. Which the British they wanted to eliminate Germany because they were an economic juggernaut at that time. So what they were trying to do is eliminate the competition of Germany. That's the role, or part of the reason why they wanted to paint Germany as being bad. Their propaganda ministries in Britain would say that when the German troops were going into Belgium, that what they were doing simply they were cutting off women's arms and stuff like that. There's no proof of that. But they used that, again, the propaganda tool, the same propaganda tool that was used at Waco. They have arms such and such, da-da-da, it's a crazy lunatic. Or, you remember why we went in Iraq? You remember there was a witness that brought it forth that simply is that he was involved in baby killing? You remember that? See, they used this word here. They said this word with the Bush administration. That is the older man Bush. They're half human or subhuman. That's a clever trick by the propagandists to say to make your enemy look inferior, as though they're subhuman. They're not really human. They're dogs. They're animals. You see, and people eat that up. They say, "Oh yeah, they're our enemy. They sure are." I believe them. So in 1947, with the aim to brainwash world leaders, educational establishments, and corporations who would then facilitate Tavistock concepts through group initiations under the concept of group dynamics to form consensus of opinion using a controlled environment and peer pressure. All going back to the whole thing of what I call when you're a child in the school system, to put pressure on the child such and such to stand on his own. And eventually you would crack and you couldn't stand on your own unless you were a superhuman kid. You fell for that. They know that. The effect is that this effect is that an individual denies that change has actually taken place, not realizing that they have indeed been brainwashed. Such groups included the Navy, the National Education Association, the largest teachers body in the whole United States. The NEA has drafted the program for the training of the nation's primary and secondary school teachers and is active in educational reform. And reforming simply is it's a military term. Means form, means if you look at the military, the army, you reform. If you were fighting in this direction here, you're told by your commander, says you get together, reform here, and go in a different direction. Either you attack on the right flank or the left flank, that type of thing. You reform. You see, this is a military term. Okay? Let's see. Okay, corporations and global governments. Founding members, Eric, E-R-I-C, Trist, T-R-I-S-T. Again, he's part of Tavistock. But he's probably also part of the Frankfurt School. Based at Wellington House. There, The Climate of Civilization is written in 1917 by Corey Mayhem. Corey, C-O-R-R-E-A, Mullen, M-O-Y-L-A-N. Walsh was a reader that provided the basis of conditions that could form a world government by one government. When I was in college, I studied political science, international relations. And I remember, this is in 1979, 80, 81. They were already pushing to brainwash us to have world government. Seriously. I debated these guys, and I didn't win. In fact, I lost, because what happened was simply people are already this is the concept of people. Oh, it's a new idea. It must be better than the old one. That's how simple it is, folks. This is a new idea. We got a better idea for you. Like example, we're going to have electric cars, such and such. This is going to work really well. In reality, it's not. It's not going to work at all, because it's going to be controlled. You're not going to be able to go, but only so fast and only so far. So the gasoline engine will be inferior, you see. All these little things, they're saying, we have some new things here, techniques, what's to work out better. And what was wrong with the old one? You see. Well, it's inferior. No, it's not. It's just simply they're planting seeds to direct you in a direction that they want you to be in. You see. Aren't you interested about controlling the earth? About the whole issue of pollution. It's a very simple deal. You can go by a major highway here where I'm at. Tractor trailers drive by their 18-wheelers all the time. They're putting out pollution all the time also from their stacks, okay, in their vehicles. But I don't see any trees dying along the highway at all. That tells me simply is a basic trial of that. They're not dying, you see. In fact, they're converting that carbon dioxide and making oxygen back in this thing. And we've been brainwashed in that area. People think, oh, that's such and such. No, it's not. It's basic. So in this endeavor, the members of the board consulted with the British royal family, obtained the approval of the Olympians, the inner core of the Committee of 300 to formulate a strategy. Funding was provided by the monarchy, the Rothschilds, the Milner Group, and the Rockefeller Family Trust. I want to make you aware of this. Rockefeller is not, how would I say this? He's not one of the in group. I mean, he's put out there, his name is put out there as though he's a major person, which he is. But he is not what we call, he's just a tool being used by those who want world government. You see. But his name is always out there. Okay? The words of German historian and philosopher Oswald Spinnaker, Decline of the West, published in 1918, was added to their reading list because of the focus on cynical nature of the rise and fall of civilizations. Tavistock thinking was that Spinnaker had indoctrinated Western civilization to believe that it would err on the side of the Roman civilization and expel the aliens. The genetic loss that has fallen upon Europe, and especially in Scandinavia, England, Germany, France, the Anglo-Saxons, Nordic, Alpine, Germanic races that began just before the Second World War, is already so great as to be beyond expectations, and continues at an alarming pace under the skilled guidance of Tavistock managers, Coleman wrote. Bear in mind that the origins of the British royal family is German. That's correct. The Tavistock Institute viewed the Western and classical civilization as the superior civilization, but found it was to be the stumbling block to their desire of the New World Order, a concept which was first advanced by Winston Churchill. To correct this problem, the whole thrust of Tavistock was to democratize the West by attack on womanhood and the racial, moral, spiritual, and religion foundations upon which Western civilizations rested. Tavistock organized the economic system in time for World War I by reconstructing the U.S. banking and currency system, which is located at Wellington House, which is how the Federal Reserve came into existence, using the income from the American taxpayers to facilitate its goals. To engineer consent, self-preservation, ambition, pride, hunger, love of family and children, patriotism, initiation, desire to be a leader have been used to exploit not only the American public, but is deep-seated in the foreign policy of Tavistock. Hence, the U.S. and the UK, if one looks at this unfolding of the Arab Spring, one might find many similarities, especially in the case of Libya and Syria. It's interesting also to deal with Syria. Simply, we don't hear any more about that now, do we? So what's going on there, you see? But that was all the focus at one time here before all this craziness that took place in 2020. Tavistock is believed to be behind the pro-abortion publicly, the prohibition of drugs, sodomy and lesbianism, family traditions, and the fierce attack on the Constitution. Our misconduct of foreign policy and our economic system programmed to fail, wrote Coleman. So past Tavistock propagandists included these people: Lord Northcliffe, Edward Bernays, which is a cousin of Sigmund Freud, and Eleanor Roosevelt. Do you know that Eleanor Roosevelt took trips to the Soviet Union before the Second World War? Did you know that? The Tavistock PSYOPs campaign to mobilize public opinion was first set in their World War II anti-German campaign. And here's the interesting thing about Germany. There are almost as many German people at that time as they were English. Did you know that actually our Constitution is going to decide what language is going to be spoken? And it only was one vote from being German. Did you know that? It hadn't have been for the one vote for the other side that we were going to speak English. And then what happened simply is that, guess what? It was English instead of German. Because there have always been German people here. And German people are from Austria, parts of them also in Switzerland, also possibly some in Poland. And then also, those are probably the four areas. But anyway, they all settle up in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area. Many of them settle also in Canada. And many of them settle in the South also. The two major groups that settled in the South were the English and the Scotch Irish. But there were also the provincial governor here in South Carolina allowed other groups to come from other areas. And so what happened was there were certain, not towns, certain plots of property that were given to the German settlers to be in a certain place. And that's why you have certain towns in South Carolina. They're called Orangeburg, Bamberg, Williamsburg. And there's Williamsburg. Okay, there's three of them. But they also had other places also. And they also, the French came here, the Huguenots, who were running away from being slaughtered themselves, and they settled in Charleston. And then they were also given a spot in western South Carolina called New Bordeaux, which is simply French. And they allowed them to do that, and they were set across land, and were given, they pursued two things. One was to work with silk, and also to work with wine, so they grew grapes. So this is all, this is what settled here in the Germans, but they were mainly concentrated in certain plats and certain such. And some of those plats didn't ever work out. It worked for 20 or 30 years, and then people abandoned it. So let's go on here. The Tavistock PSYOP campaign to mobilize public opinion was first set in World War. Okay, we did that Germany campaign. So through the Bryce report, BRYCE report, which has been repeatedly recently as do with Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. Most of the use on Libya comes from London. And that mantra follows the successful patterns of premeditated slaughter, mutation, women attacked, children killed, pillage, and even the Red Cross and prisoners are being attacked. So that concludes what I'm sharing with you tonight. Again, this is to do with MK Ultra. Some of these people who I'm talking about, who were a part even Tavistock, and also to do with Frankfurt School, were allowed to come to our country as refugees before Second World War. The other thing most people are not aware of is that there was, thank you. Appreciate it, Miss SOJ. Thank you for, you read Ben Franklin did not like Germans. Okay, he wouldn't have been cool if it was Dutch. Okay. There's a movie dealing with Eleanor Roosevelt, and they make it pretty clear in the movie that she goes to the Soviet Union, but I've known that. She was part of that whole deal. The Roosevelts also are what we call royalty family, so they're not even part. In fact, almost all the presidents of this country, in reality, they've never been what I call a normal, standard American people. A lot of them are just tied with royalty. But so they use both sides. They use the right and left because they don't want you to come into unity and see the real enemy in your backyard. They don't want you to see the true enemy who is destroying not only this country, but all of Europe and other countries throughout the world. You know, why would the United States Army, the United States military be involved in over 200 countries in the world? Why would that be? Well, part of it's also to do with the United States as the military arm of the Trinity, you know, the three prongs. You know, Europe, that is in Vatican, is the religious center. London is the banking and financial center. And Washington is the military arm. And the military arm is to do what I call, hey, you get out of line, we'll do something to you. We'll overthrow you. We'll do whatever it is to do, a coup, whatever. Read some of the things that take place with Wilson, with the United Fruit Company, which is today Chiquita. Basically, people in Guatemala and other countries in Central America refused to work because they were not getting paid well enough. So they pushed the agenda towards the senators at that time in the early 1900s under the Wilson administration that we need to use our U.S. military and get these people back to work. You see how that's done. You see how someone with some powerful money can control and manipulate these senators who basically, most of them have just got a big old ego, you see. And most of them are also lawyers, you see. They make laws that actually, the more laws you put on the books, folks, means you're more of a slave, you see. So I appreciate your attention, and I wish you a good night. And if you have anything else you might like to ask, I'll try to share it with you. It's just important that you understand how we're being steered. We're being used as cows, and we're being given a choice of there's two chutes here on one side and the other side, but eventually that chute goes into one. And it's to do the slaughter. It's to do away with people. It's also to do away with countries. Georgia Guidestones makes this very clear. They paint the picture as though that human beings themselves are bad. And that means simply there's a problem with that particular perspective, because they basically see that they hate life. They hate all life. These people who are in control of this planet right now, they hate life. You see. Okay, thank you again for your attention, and you have a good night. Take care.